The church was packed. I could hear the murmur of voices, the quiet sobbing, the creak of the old wooden pews. My hands trembled as I pushed open the heavy double doors. The smell of lilies hit me first, overpowering and sweet, the smell of death. And there, at the front, sat my coffin. Yes, my coffin. I stood there, frozen, staring at the casket that supposedly held my body. People gasped, heads turned. My granddaughter dropped the bouquet she was holding. My son, Mark, went pale as a ghost. Every eye was on me as I stepped inside. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the whispers. "She's alive," someone said. "Is that a ghost?" another muttered. I walked slowly, each step echoing in the silent room. The pastor's Bible slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a loud thud. My fingers brushed the side of the casket, and I looked directly at my son. "You told them I was dead," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I'm standing right here." The room erupted into chaos. My son stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. His wife clutched her pearls, her face twisted in shock and fear. I felt a surge of strength course through me. The lies they told, the pain they caused, it all boiled up inside. And now, here I was, exposing them in front of everyone. But before I could say more, I felt the world tilt around me. My knees buckled and everything went black. "Hi, my name is Eleanor White, and I'm 82 years old. I never imagined I'd be attending my own funeral. I never imagined my own family would try to erase me like I never existed. It all started 3 months ago, when I fell down the stairs in my old farmhouse. At least that's what everyone thought happened. But the truth, the truth was much darker. You see, I live alone in a small town in Vermont. I've been a widow for 20 years, and though my body is old and brittle, my mind is still sharp as ever. Or so I thought. My son Mark had been visiting more often, helping with groceries, checking the mail, making small repairs. I thought he was being kind. But then little things started happening. My bank statements went missing. My medications were swapped with strange pills, and I'd find my bedroom window unlocked even though I never touched it. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, something didn't feel right. One night I overheard Mark on the phone. He thought I was asleep. His voice was low, but I caught the words, "She won't last much longer. Once she's gone, the house is ours." My heart dropped. My own son. The boy I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for. I wanted to confront him, but fear kept me silent. Instead, I started writing everything down. Every odd moment, every strange thing I noticed. I hid the notes where no one could find them. Then one morning, I woke up in the hospital. They told me I had fallen, hit my head, and was lucky to be alive. But I remembered everything. I remembered the push. Mark standing at the top of the stairs watching me fall. The doctors said I needed rest. Mark insisted I come stay at his house while I recovered. I refused. I knew if I went with him, I might never come back. So I made a plan. A quiet plan. I disappeared. I took only what I needed, cashed out some hidden savings, and stayed with an old friend in another town. For weeks I healed in secret, watching the news, reading the obituaries. And then, one morning, I saw it. My own death notice. "They told everyone I was dead," I whispered, staring at the paper. That's when I knew I had to come back, not just to prove I was alive, but to expose them for what they had done. The day of the funeral came. I dressed in simple clothes, pulled my hair back, and walked into that church like a ghost returned from the grave. And just when I thought the worst was over, I realized my nightmare was only beginning. Because as I collapsed at my own funeral, I heard Mark's voice above the screaming crowd. Cold. Ruthless. "She wasn't supposed to be here." When I opened my eyes, I was back in a hospital bed. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled my nose, and the beeping of the heart monitor was steady but loud in my ears. My body ached everywhere. For a moment, I wondered if everything had been a dream. until I saw the flowers on the table. They were the same lilies from the funeral. And there, sitting in the corner of the room, was Mark. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Well?" he said slowly, his voice tight. "You just had to ruin everything, didn't you, Mom?" I froze. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the voice of a grieving son. This was the voice of a man cornered, angry, and dangerous. I began, but he cut me off. "You should have stayed dead," he hissed. Chills ran down my spine. He glanced toward the door, then leaned closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You think anyone will believe you? They already buried you once. You don't belong here anymore." Before I could respond, a nurse walked in. Mark straightened up, plastering on a fake smile. "How is she, nurse?" he asked sweetly, as if he hadn't just threatened me. "She's stable," the nurse replied, giving me a gentle pat on the arm. "You're lucky to have such a caring son." I almost laughed. Caring? He was a vulture waiting for his prey to die. When the nurse left, Mark whispered, "Don't try anything. You're too old to win this game." Then he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. My hands trembled as I clutched the blanket. My own child wanted me gone, truly gone. But he underestimated me. I may have been 82, but I wasn't weak. Not anymore. As soon as he was out of sight, I reached for the phone beside the bed. I dialed the only number I trusted, my childhood friend, Margaret. "Eleanor?" Her voice came through the line, shaky but relieved. "Maggie, I need your help," I whispered. "It's worse than I thought. He tried to kill me again." There was silence. Then she said, "Tell me everything." I told her everything, about the push, the fake obituary, the funeral. She gasped, crying out, "That monster!" "I need to get out of here," I said, "before he tries again." That night, Maggie came to the hospital disguised as a volunteer. She wheeled me out in a chair, my head covered with a scarf. No one stopped us. We drove through the quiet Vermont streets until we reached her cabin deep in the woods. The air smelled of pine and freedom. I felt safer there, but I knew it wouldn't last. Because Mark would come looking for me. Over the next few days, Maggie and I pieced together every clue, every document I had hidden. I found the notes I wrote before disappearing, and with Maggie's help we uncovered something shocking. Mark had already transferred my property into his name using forged papers. He had planned everything. The rage inside me burned hotter than ever. But along with the rage came fear. What else was he capable of? One evening, as I sat by the window sipping tea, I saw headlights approaching Maggie's cabin. My heart stopped. Only a handful of people knew I was alive. Maggie peeked outside. "It's a black SUV," she whispered. My blood ran cold. The door creaked open before we could react. A tall man stepped inside, Mark's lawyer holding a folder. "You need to come with me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Mark wants to speak to you." Maggie stood in front of me. "She's not going anywhere." The man smirked. "You don't have a choice. Either she comes now or this gets ugly." I gripped the arms of my chair, my heart pounding. "I'll go," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "Take me to him." As they escorted me to the SUV, I felt the weight of dread pressing down on me. The cold night air bit at my skin, and Maggie's voice echoed behind me. "Be careful, Eleanor." The car door slammed, and we drove off into the darkness. We stopped at an old warehouse outside town. Mark was waiting inside, leaning against a table, his face twisted into something almost unrecognizable. "Well, Mom," he said, clapping his hands slowly. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" My legs shook as I stepped forward. "Why are you doing this, Mark?" "I'm your mother." He laughed bitterly. "You're nothing but an obstacle. You think I spent my life waiting for scraps while you clung to that house, those savings. I deserve it all." I stared at him, tears filling my eyes. "You don't deserve a thing if this is what you've become." He grabbed my arm, squeezing hard. "This ends tonight." Suddenly headlights flooded the room, police sirens wailed. Mark froze. "Step away from her," a voice shouted. Maggie had called the police. As officers swarmed in, Mark let go of me and bolted toward the back door. The lawyer tried to block the police but was tackled to the ground. I stood there shaking as they dragged my son away in handcuffs. He glared at me, spitting out one last sentence. "This isn't over, Mum. You'll regret this." As they drove him away, I felt both relief and heartbreak. He was my son, my flesh and blood. But he had become a stranger to me. I thought it was over. I thought I was safe. But 2 days later, I received an anonymous letter at Maggie's cabin. No name, no return address. Just one sentence written in red ink. "If you think Mark was the only one after you, you're wrong." The letter trembled in my hands as I read it over and over. Each word carved into my mind like a knife. "If you think Mark was the only one after you, you're wrong." My breath caught. Who else could be involved? My circle was small. My son was already in jail. Was it his wife? A neighbour? Someone from the town? The paranoia clawed at me, making my skin crawl. Maggie noticed my shaking hands. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice hushed. I handed it to her silently. Her face went pale. "Eleanor, this means someone is still watching you, someone close." I swallowed hard. "Then we have to find out who." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle outside, made me sit up in fear. The moonlight spilling through the window felt cold and unfriendly. I kept a kitchen knife under my pillow, just in case. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to live in fear. Whoever this was, I would uncover the truth. I started digging into my own life like an investigator. I called the bank to check my accounts. To my horror, I learned there had been several attempts to access my funds in the last 48 hours, using my personal information. "Maggie," I said, clutching the phone, "someone else is trying to steal my money, and they have my details." She frowned. "Who could have access to all that?" As soon as she said it, I thought of one person, Linda, Mark's wife. She had been unusually quiet at the funeral, almost too calm when I showed up alive. And she was the one who always helped me with paperwork over the last few years. But then another memory flashed in my mind. My attorney, David, had recently retired and left his assistant in charge temporarily. That assistant, Greg, had been oddly friendly, always offering to take care of things for me. 2 suspects, both close, both dangerous. I decided to pay Linda a visit first. Maggie insisted on coming with me. We drove to Mark and Linda's house, a pristine suburban home that now felt like a snake's nest. When Linda opened the door, she froze. "Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling. "You're alive?" "Yes," I said coldly. "Surprised to see me?" Her eyes darted nervously. "No, come in." Inside, the house smelled of expensive candles, but beneath it was something sour, fear. She offered us tea, which I declined. I sat across from her, staring hard into her eyes. "I know someone else is after me, Linda. Is it you?" I asked bluntly. She flinched, spilling her tea. "What? No, I would never—" "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice sharp. "Mark is in jail. He said I'd regret this. Did you help him?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't help him, I swear, but—" She looked down at her hands. "I knew what he was planning. I was too scared to stop him." Anger surged through me. "You knew he tried to kill me and you did nothing," Linda sobbed. "He threatened me too. He said if I didn't go along, he'd take our son away from me. I was trapped." I wanted to hate her, but I saw the truth in her fear. She was weak, not evil. But before I could press further, my phone buzzed. It was Maggie's number, but when I answered, it wasn't her voice. "You're digging too deep, Eleanor," the voice said, cold and distorted. "Back off, or next time you won't be lucky enough to walk away." The line went dead. I turned pale. Maggie's phone. Someone has her phone. Linda gasped. What does that mean? It means Maggie might be in danger, I said, my voice breaking. We rushed back to the cabin. The door was wide open, swinging in the wind. Inside, the furniture was overturned, and there was a single note on the floor, written in the same red ink as before. You were warned. Now she pays the price. I collapsed to my knees. Maggie was gone. That night I sat on the floor of the ransacked cabin, tears streaming down my face. Whoever this was, they weren't just after me. They were willing to hurt the only person I trusted. As I clutched the note, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture message. My hands shook as I opened it. It was Maggie tied to a chair in a dimly lit room, her eyes wide with terror. The caption read, "You have 48 hours to hand over everything, or she dies." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I was old, but I wasn't helpless. They wanted a fight. They were going to get one. For the first time in a long while, I felt the fire inside me burn brighter than my fear. I wasn't going to let them win. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years, someone from my past who owed me a favour. When he answered, I said, "It's Eleanor White. I need your help. It's life or death." The voice on the other end of the line hesitated for only a second before answering. "Eleanor? I never thought I'd hear from you again." "James," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "I don't have time to explain everything. Someone has taken Maggie. They're threatening to kill her unless I hand over everything I own." There was silence, then a deep sigh. "You're in trouble, aren't you? Just like old times." James Collins was a retired detective, now living quietly on the outskirts of town. Years ago, he had helped my late husband expose a local corruption ring. If there was anyone who could help me now, it was him. "Meet me at the diner on Main Street in an hour," he said. "Don't bring anyone else. And Eleanor, be careful. If someone's bold enough to kidnap your friend, they won't hesitate to kill you too." The diner was nearly empty when I arrived. James sat in the corner booth, wearing a worn leather jacket and a look that said he'd seen too much in his life. His hair was greyer, his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You look like hell," he said as I slid into the seat. "I've been through hell," I replied. I handed him the photo of Maggie and the notes I had received. He studied them carefully, his brow furrowing. Red ink. Anonymous threats. This isn't random. This is someone who knows you, someone close enough to make it personal. I nodded. Mark's in jail. Linda claims she's innocent. But this feels bigger than them. There's someone else pulling the strings. James leaned back, thinking. "We'll need to trace where that photo came from. Do you still have the phone?" "Yes." "Good. I'll have a friend track the location from the metadata. In the meantime, you need to stay somewhere safe." I chuckled bitterly. Safe? Nowhere is safe for me anymore. James leaned in, his voice low. "Don't underestimate yourself, Eleanor. You're tougher than most people half your age. That's why they're scared of you." Later that evening, we got a hit. The photo had been sent from an abandoned motel on the edge of town. James loaded his gun and handed me a small pepper spray canister. "Stay behind me," he said. We drove through the darkness, my hands clenched tight in my lap. The motel appeared like a ghost from the past, its neon sign flickering, windows boarded up, and weeds growing through the cracks in the pavement. James parked the car a few yards away. "If things go bad, run," he instructed. But I had no intention of running. We slipped inside the building, the floorboards creaking under our feet. The air smelled of mold and something metallic, blood. My stomach twisted. A faint cry echoed down the hall. "Eleanor!" My heart nearly stopped. It was Maggie. James motioned for me to stay low as we crept toward the sound. Behind a half-open door, we saw her tied to a chair, her face bruised but alive. Standing beside her was a man I recognized instantly, Greg, my former attorney's assistant. His eyes were cold, his smile twisted. "Well, well," he said, stepping into the light. "The walking corpse herself." I froze. "Why, Greg? Why are you doing this?" He laughed darkly. "Because you're worth more dead than alive." Mark was too sloppy, too emotional. "But me? I'm smart. I know where all your money is and I know how to make it mine." James raised his gun. "Step away from her," Greg sneered. "You think you can stop this? I have men outside. You won't leave here alive." My pulse raced. Outside. There were more of them. Suddenly a loud crash echoed through the motel. The front door burst open. Police swarmed in. James's friend from the force had followed our location. Gunshots rang out. Greg tried to grab Maggie as a shield, but James fired, hitting him in the shoulder. He collapsed, screaming in pain, as officers rushed to secure the scene. I ran to Maggie, cutting her ropes with trembling hands. "You're safe now," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. But as the police dragged Greg away, he looked at me with a sinister grin. "You think this is over, old woman? I was just the beginning. The real one is still out there." The words haunted me as we drove away. Back at James's safe house, Maggie and I sat together, both shaken but alive. James poured us tea, his expression grim. "He's right, Eleanor," he said quietly. "Someone else is behind this. Greg was working for someone." I stared into my cup, my hands trembling. "Who? Who hates me this much?" James handed me a file he had grabbed from Greg's bag during the raid. "Maybe this will tell us." Inside were documents, fake wills, property deeds and bank transfers. But one name kept appearing, scrawled on every page. When I saw it, my blood ran cold. It wasn't Mark, it wasn't Greg, it was someone I had trusted my whole life. My own sister, Helen. I dropped the file, my heart pounding in my ears. Helen, my baby sister, the one I had raised after our parents died, the one I had trusted with everything. Maggie gasped. "Helen? But she lives in Florida. Why would she—" James interrupted. "Because she's been quietly planning this for years. She's been moving money into offshore accounts. Greg was just her pawn." I felt sick, betrayed, broken. "She's coming for you, Eleanor," James said grimly. "And next time she won't send someone else. She'll come herself." That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I heard a car pull up outside. My heart leapt into my throat. I peeked through the curtain. A black SUV sat idling in the driveway. The door opened, and stepping out, dressed in all black, was Helen. The night was silent except for the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. I watched from behind the curtain, my breath shallow, my heart hammering. The woman walking toward the house was not the sister I remembered. Her once soft blonde hair was now tied back tightly, her face hard and cold. She carried herself like someone who had nothing left to lose and nothing to fear. James appeared silently at my side, gun in hand. "Stay here," he whispered. "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "She's here for me. This ends tonight." Maggie stirred from the couch. "Eleanor, please don't—" But I had already opened the door. Helen stopped halfway up the porch steps, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Well, well, the old ghost finally shows her face." I swallowed hard. "Why, Helen? Why are you doing this?" She tilted her head, as if amused by my question. "Why? Because I've spent my entire life in your shadow. You were the golden child, the one who got the house, the money, the respect. I got nothing. You never shared. You never cared." "That's not true," I snapped. "I raised you. I gave you everything I could." "Everything you could," she sneered, "but never everything I wanted." James stepped onto the porch, his gun aimed at her. "This is over, Helen. You're not leaving here with anything." She smirked. "Oh, James, you think you're the hero? I planned for this." Suddenly, two men emerged from the SUV behind her, armed and menacing. They spread out, circling the porch. My knees wobbled, but I stood my ground. Helen's voice was ice. "You're going to sign over every asset you own, Eleanor, tonight, or your precious friend dies." Maggie whimpered from inside. I felt rage surge through me. "You touch her, and you'll regret it," I said, my voice shaking but fierce. Helen laughed. "You? What can you do, old woman?" The click of James's gun echoed through the night. "Try her," he said flatly. For a moment, the standoff held. Then headlights swept across the yard. Police cars screeched to a halt. The officers James had called earlier stormed out, weapons drawn. Helen's men froze, dropping their guns as they were surrounded. Helen hissed, "You think this changes anything? You can't stop what's coming." Two officers grabbed her arms, pulling her back. She fought like a wild animal, screaming, "You'll lose everything, Eleanor, everything." As they dragged her toward the car, she turned her head and spat out one final warning. "You think I'm the worst? I was just cleaning up for someone far worse than me." Hours later, the house was quiet again. Maggie sat wrapped in a blanket, trembling, while James poured me a cup of tea. "She's in custody," he said. But she wasn't lying. Someone else is involved. She kept saying she was just a piece of the puzzle. I stared at the steaming cup in my hands. Who could be worse than my own sister? James leaned back. Maybe the person funding her, someone with power, someone who's been watching you for a long time. A shiver ran down my spine. I went to bed that night, but sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside made me flinch. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I looked, no one was there. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was an unknown number. The message read, "Helen failed. Now it's my turn. See you soon, Eleanor." The next morning, James burst into my room. "We need to move. Whoever sent that message knows where you are. This place isn't safe anymore." Maggie stood by the door, her eyes wide with fear. "Where will we go?" James grabbed his keys. "Somewhere they won't expect." As we drove away, I glanced back at the house one last time. My life had become a storm of betrayal, and I was caught in the centre of it. But I wasn't done fighting. While on the road, James handed me a folder. Before they took Helen, she mentioned a name. I pulled this from an old file. I opened it and froze. The name leapt off the page like a ghost from my past. It was Edward Whitmore, my late husband's former business partner, a man I thought had died years ago. James looked at me gravely. He's alive, and he's the one behind all of this. My blood ran cold. Edward had been ruthless in life. If he was alive and orchestrating this, then the danger was far from over. We checked into a secluded inn under false names. James worked through the night, gathering intel on Edward. The more he uncovered, the more I felt my world collapsing. Edward had been siphoning money from my husband's company for decades. When I inherited everything, he lost access to the fortune he believed was his. And now, he wanted it back, at any cost. As dawn broke, James placed a stack of papers on the table. We know where he's hiding, but going there means risking everything. I stared at the map, my hands trembling. If this is the only way to end it, then I'm ready. Maggie grabbed my arm. "Eleanor, no, he's dangerous. You'll get yourself killed." I looked her in the eyes. "I've been running my whole life. Not anymore." We packed up and prepared to leave. But as we stepped out of the inn, a black van screeched to a stop in front of us. The doors flew open. Masked men jumped out, guns raised. Before I could react, they grabbed me, dragging me toward the van. James shouted, firing his weapon, but he was outnumbered. Maggie screamed as they shoved me inside. The last thing I saw before the door slammed shut was James on the ground, fighting to get up, and Maggie crying out my name. The van sped into the night, and in the darkness a voice spoke from the shadows inside the vehicle. "Welcome back, Eleanor. Did you miss me?" The van smelled of gasoline and sweat. My wrists were bound, my mouth dry, my heart pounding against my ribs. The man sitting across from me slowly removed his mask. It was Edward Whitmore. The years had not been kind to him, yet his eyes still burned with the same cold ambition I remembered from decades ago. His hair was now silver, his face lined, but his smirk was chillingly familiar. "You look surprised, Eleanor," he said in a smooth, mocking tone. "Did you really think I was dead?" I glared at him. "You were supposed to be. I went to your funeral." He chuckled. "Ah, yes, the empty casket. That was the best investment I ever made. You see, disappearing was the only way to rebuild what your husband stole from me." "My husband stole nothing," I spat. "You betrayed him. You betrayed us all." His smile faded. "He got in my way, just like you." The van jolted to a stop, throwing me against the seat. Edward nodded to the men, and they dragged me out into the cold night air. We were in the middle of nowhere, a rundown estate surrounded by high fences and shadows. The once grand house stood like a corpse, its windows shattered, its walls cracked. They pushed me inside, tying me to a chair in what must have been the dining room years ago. The table was covered with papers, maps and photos of me, my house, my friends. They had been watching me for a long time. Edward poured himself a drink, sitting across from me like a man entertaining a guest. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Eleanor. I was supposed to have everything, your house, your money, your legacy, but you just wouldn't die." I narrowed my eyes. "You tried to use my son, my sister, even your pawns like Greg. How many lives have you ruined?" He leaned forward, his voice low. "As many as it takes to get what's mine." I felt a surge of anger so strong it burned away my fear. "You'll never get it. Not while I'm alive." Edward smirked. "That's the point. You won't be." The door creaked open, and one of his men entered, whispering something to him. Edward nodded, his expression darkening. "It seems your detective friend is persistent. He's been sniffing around, but don't worry, I'll deal with him soon enough." My heart tightened. James was coming for me, and he was walking straight into a trap. Hours passed. They left me tied, a single bulb swinging overhead. My mind raced, searching for a way out. I remembered the small pepper spray James had given me, still hidden inside my sleeve. They hadn't checked me thoroughly. Carefully, I shifted, feeling the metal canister against my wrist. My chance would come. I just had to wait. Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness outside. Edward looked out the window, grinning. "Ah, the hero arrives." The front door burst open. James stormed in, gun raised. "Let her go, Edward." Edward clapped slowly. "So predictable." From the shadows, more of Edward's men appeared, surrounding James. He was outnumbered again. I screamed, "James, no!" Edward pointed a gun at me. "One move and she dies." James dropped his weapon, his face pale with fury. Edward walked behind me, placing the barrel against my temple. "This is the end, Eleanor. Any last words?" I took a deep breath, my fingers closing around the pepper spray. "Yes." I jerked my arm free and sprayed it directly into his eyes. Edward screamed, stumbling backward, firing his gun wildly. Chaos erupted. James lunged forward, tackling one of the men, grabbing his weapon. Gunshots echoed through the house. The men scattered as police sirens wailed outside. James had called for backup before coming. Edward, blinded and enraged, stumbled toward the back door. "This isn't over!" he shouted, vanishing into the night as officers stormed the estate. James rushed to my side, cutting my ropes. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I'm fine, but he got away." The officers secured the scene, arresting Edward's men. But Edward himself had vanished like a ghost. As we drove away, James said grimly, "He's not finished. He'll come back for you." I stared out the window at the dark forest passing by. "Then I'll be ready for him." Back at a safe location, Maggie hugged me tightly, crying into my shoulder. "I thought I lost you." I held her close. "I'm not going anywhere. Not yet." But as I sat down to rest, my phone buzzed. A message appeared, just 3 words. "See you soon." I knew then that Edward wasn't gone. He was watching, waiting. And this war between us had only just begun. We barely slept that night. Every creak, every gust of wind scraping against the safe house windows made me sit upright with my heart pounding. Edward had escaped, and with a man like him, silence was more dangerous than noise. James sat at the table, sipping coffee, his jaw tight. "He won't stop," he said, almost to himself. "Men like Edward never stop until they win or die." I stared into my cup. "Then we make sure he doesn't win." Maggie, still shaken, whispered, "But how, Eleanor? He has resources, people everywhere. We can't fight this alone." James looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "She's right. We need to be smarter. We'll draw him out, but on our terms." Over the next few days, we moved locations constantly, never staying in one place for long. James called in favours from old law enforcement friends, while I quietly began gathering every piece of evidence I had: documents from Greg's bag, bank statements, and a secret recording device I had planted during my captivity. When we played back the recording, we heard Edward's voice. "When she's gone, transfer everything to the offshore accounts. Make it look like she vanished." James grinned grimly. "That's enough to put him away for life if we can get him." We sent the recording to the authorities, but Edward was always one step ahead. He had allies in high places. The case stalled. Meanwhile, more threats came, phone calls in the middle of the night, letters slipped under doors, each one colder than the last. Then, one evening, while we were staying at a remote farmhouse, the power went out. Maggie gasped, clutching my arm. James grabbed his gun, moving to the window. "Stay back," he ordered. Outside, a car engine rumbled. Headlights flashed once, then turned off. Silence. My pulse raced. I knew it was him. The front door suddenly burst open, and smoke filled the room. Masked men stormed in, grabbing James and throwing him to the ground. I tried to fight, but one of them pinned my arms. Through the haze, I saw him, Edward, stepping inside with a calm smile, as if this was all a game. "Well, Eleanor," he said softly, "I told you I'd see you soon." They dragged me and James into a black van once more, but this time there were no police coming to save us. Maggie's screams echoed behind us as the door slammed shut. My heart broke knowing they had left her behind, terrified and alone. Hours later, they hauled us into a secluded mountain lodge. The windows were boarded, the walls reinforced. This was no temporary hideout. This was a place Edward had prepared for a final showdown. He sat us down at a long table, gesturing like a gracious host. "You're persistent, Eleanor. I'll give you that. But it ends tonight." James growled, "You won't get away with this." Edward laughed. "I already have. By the time the world knows what happened to you, it'll be too late." He laid out papers in front of me. "Sign these. Transfer everything to me, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to say goodbye to your friends." I met his cold stare. "No." His smile vanished. "You're still stubborn. Fine." He pulled out a small device and pressed a button. A live video feed appeared on a screen behind him. Maggie, tied to a chair again, with a masked man standing behind her. My heart stopped. "No, no, please." Edward leaned close, his breath cold against my face. "Sign the papers, Eleanor, or watch her die." Tears blurred my vision. I looked at James, who gave me a barely noticeable nod. It was the signal. We had to stall for time. I picked up the pen with trembling hands. "If I sign, you let her go?" Edward smirked. "Of course, I'm a man of my word." But just as I was about to touch the paper, I noticed something. James had slipped his foot under the table, pressing a small button on a device hidden in his boot. He had planted a tracker before we were taken. Help was on the way. We just had to survive long enough. The tension in the room was unbearable. Edward grew impatient. "Do it, Eleanor," he barked. I held the pen over the document, then deliberately dropped it to the floor. Oops. As I bent to pick it up, James lunged forward, knocking the table into Edward. The papers flew everywhere. Chaos erupted. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass ashtray, and smashed it over the head of one of Edward's men. Gunshots roared. I dropped to the floor, covering my head as James tackled another man. Edward shouted, "Kill them both!" Suddenly, the sound of helicopters thundered overhead. The windows shattered as special forces stormed the lodge. "FBI, drop your weapons!" Edward tried to run, but James tackled him to the ground, forcing the gun from his hand. Officers swarmed in, handcuffing him as he screamed like a madman. "You'll regret this, Eleanor," he shouted as they dragged him away. "You can't kill me. You can't stop me." Maggie was rescued moments later, shaken but alive. I hugged her so tightly I thought my heart would burst. James placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over." But as the officers loaded Edward into the helicopter, he looked at me one last time, his eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't the end," he said softly, almost like a promise. That night, back at the safe house, I sat by the window watching the sunrise. The world felt still, but I knew better. Evil like Edward's didn't vanish so easily. And as if to confirm my fear, my phone buzzed once again. The message read, "You stopped me, but someone else will finish what I started." The sun had barely risen, yet the warmth of its light did nothing to ease the chill in my bones. I sat in silence, staring at that message on my phone. "You stopped me, but someone else will finish what I started." Edward was locked away in a high-security facility, but his words haunted me. If he was telling the truth, then this nightmare wasn't over. James entered the room, his face drawn with worry. "You saw the message?" I nodded. "It means someone else is still out there. Someone we haven't even seen yet." Maggie, sitting across from me wrapped in a blanket, whispered, "Who could it be?" Edward was the mastermind. James shook his head. He wasn't acting alone. Men like Edward never work without a network. There's always someone pulling strings in the shadows. Later that day, James received a call from one of his contacts in the FBI. "They've intercepted communication from Edward's accounts," he told me. "Money transfers, encrypted messages. He was working with an international syndicate, and the leader of that syndicate is still free." My stomach dropped. "So he was just a pawn?" "Not a pawn," James corrected, "but part of something bigger." The name the FBI gave us made my blood run cold. Victor Kane, a man I had met only once, decades ago, at one of my husband's business gatherings. He had been charming then, with a smile that never reached his eyes. I remembered my husband whispering to me later, "Never trust that man." Now, Victor Kane was the ghost pulling the strings. That night, we relocated again, this time to a secluded coastal cottage. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks outside should have been comforting, but I felt only dread. James spread out files across the table. Victor's been living like a phantom. Offshore accounts, private islands, no official record of his movements. But one thing stands out. He's hosting a private gathering in Maine tomorrow night. High-profile investors. No one gets in without an invitation. I stared at the documents. "Then we find a way to get in." James looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Eleanor, it's a trap. If we show up there, we might not make it out." I took a deep breath. "This is my life, James. My fight. If I have to risk everything to end this, so be it." The next evening, dressed in a simple black coat and with my hair tied back, I walked into the lion's den. James had managed to forge 2 invitations. The grand estate was crawling with security, but no one looked twice at an old woman moving through the crowd. Inside, everything was lavish. Crystal chandeliers, golden drapes, guests sipping champagne as if they weren't standing in the centre of a web of crime. And there, at the far end of the room, stood Victor Kane. He was older now, but still carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he owned the world. When his eyes met mine, his smile widened. "Well," he said loudly enough for several guests to hear, "the famous Eleanor White. You've caused quite a stir." My heart pounded, but I stood tall. "You tried to destroy me." He chuckled. "Oh no, my dear. I only wanted what was rightfully mine. Edward failed, Helen failed, but me, I never fail. The room grew quiet. Guests glanced nervously between us. Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You shouldn't have come here. Now you'll disappear for good." Suddenly the lights flickered. James, who had slipped into the control room, cut the power. Panic erupted. In the confusion, I moved quickly, pulling out the recording device James had given me. "Everything you just said is recorded," I hissed into his ear. "You've just confessed in front of witnesses." Victor laughed. "Do you think anyone will make it out of here alive to use it?" But before he could act, floodlights burst through the windows. FBI agents stormed in, shouting commands. James appeared at my side, gripping my arm. "Time to go, Eleanor." Victor was tackled to the ground, screaming, "You haven't won. This isn't the end." Hours later, we watched from a safe distance as agents secured the estate. Victor Kane was finally in custody, his empire collapsing under the weight of the evidence we had gathered. I stood on the cliffside, the wind whipping my hair. For the first time in months, I felt free. James walked up beside me. "It's over, Eleanor. You did it." I looked out at the ocean, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't do it alone. Thank you, James. Thank you for believing in me." Maggie came running toward us, throwing her arms around me. "You're safe," she cried. "Yes," I whispered, hugging her tightly. "We're safe." That night, as I finally sat in peace, I received one last message. It was a single line, no name attached. "You've won this battle, Eleanor, but I'll be watching." I smiled faintly, locking the phone away. Let them watch. Because I had survived everything they threw at me, and I wasn't afraid anymore. For a brief moment, life seemed normal again. The days were quiet, filled with the soft sound of the waves against the rocks. Maggie cooked breakfast, while James kept the radio low, always listening for news. I took slow walks along the shore, trying to forget the shadows that had stalked me for months. But peace never lasts. One morning, as I walked back to the cottage, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Footprints in the sand leading up to our back door. They weren't ours. James was inside cleaning his gun. He saw my face and stood quickly. "What is it?" "Someone's been here," I whispered. He rushed outside, scanning the beach. Whoever it was, they were gone. But they had been close. Too close. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, the cottage phone rang. I answered, my voice trembling. A distorted voice said, "Did you really think Victor was the last? He worked for us. We're everywhere." Before I could respond, the line went dead. James called his FBI contact immediately, but the investigation turned up nothing. The call had been untraceable. It was clear. The syndicate Victor worked for wasn't done with me. Over the next few days, we received small warnings. A dead crow left on the porch, my bedroom window found open in the morning, Maggie's car tires slashed. These were not random acts. They were messages. Finally, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a photo of me taken from outside the cottage just the night before. Written on the back were 3 words: "Time is up." James decided we had to move again. "They're tightening the noose, Eleanor," he said grimly. "We need to hit them first." Using intelligence from the FBI, we learned that the remnants of Victor's syndicate were gathering in a hidden compound in the forests of New Hampshire. They were led by a figure known only as the Raven, a man who controlled everything from the shadows. "This is it," James said, loading his weapon. "We take him down, and this nightmare ends." Maggie begged me not to go, but I couldn't stay behind. "This fight is mine too," I told her. "I won't run anymore." The compound was heavily guarded, but under the cover of darkness, James and I slipped through the woods. The cold air burned my lungs, but adrenaline pushed me forward. We reached a clearing where a massive cabin stood, lights glowing from inside. Armed men patrolled the perimeter. James signaled me to stay low as he took out 2 guards silently. Inside, we found a room filled with monitors and files. On the largest screen, a man in a black suit appeared. He was tall, sharp-eyed, with a voice like silk and venom. "So," he said through the speaker, "the famous Eleanor White. You've been a thorn in my side for far too long." I stepped forward. "You're the Raven." He smiled coldly. "Correct. And you've caused me losses I cannot forgive. But tonight, I'll finally end you." Suddenly, alarms blared. The lights turned red. We had been spotted. James grabbed my arm. "Move, Eleanor! Now!" Bullets ripped through the air as we ran for cover. I grabbed a piece of wood and struck one of the attackers as James returned fire. The cabin filled with chaos, gunfire, shouting, the crackling of flames as something caught fire. Through the smoke, I saw the Raven escaping through a back door. I chased him, my legs burning, my heart pounding. Outside, under the moonlight, we faced each other. "You should have stayed in your grave," he hissed, pulling a knife. I stood firm. "I've already survived death once. You won't stop me." As he lunged, I sidestepped, grabbing a heavy branch and striking him across the head. He fell, dazed, just as James caught up and tackled him. Within minutes, FBI agents swarmed the compound. They had been tracking our signal. The Raven was arrested, his men captured, his empire dismantled. As they dragged him away, he spat blood and glared at me. "Even if I die, others will come. You can't stop us all." I met his stare with calm fire. "Watch me." That night, as the compound burned, I stood with James and Maggie under the stars. For the first time, I felt the weight lifting. The fight had been long, painful, but I had endured. James put a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Eleanor. Truly over." I nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." Months passed. Life became quiet again. The authorities dismantled the remnants of the syndicate. The court sentenced Edward, Helen, and the Raven to life imprisonment. My name was cleared, my assets restored. I moved back to my farmhouse in Vermont, the home that had started it all. The walls still held the echoes of the past, but they also whispered of survival. Maggie visited often, her laughter filling the rooms with life again. James checked in too, though he now returned to his quiet life. He promised me, "If trouble ever comes again, you call me." Every morning I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the hills. I was old, yes, but I was stronger than I had ever been. One day, as I walked through my garden, I found a small envelope under a flower pot. My heart skipped. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with just one sentence. "The world thinks you're safe, but we never forget." I stared at the words, then tore the paper in half. "No more fear," I whispered to myself. "Not anymore." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in my rocking chair, the warm breeze carrying the scent of lavender. I had been betrayed by my own blood, hunted by powerful men, and pushed to the edge of death. But I had walked through fire and come out alive. Looking up at the stars, I spoke softly to the night. "You thought I was dead, but I lived. I won. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. If this story gripped you, if it made you hold your breath, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? Tell us below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories of resilience and survival.